Welcome to the Invincible Innovation Show, the podcast for changemakers. Each week, I talk to the most fascinating entrepreneurs and innovation leaders about innovation, strategy, and design. Hey everyone, I'm so glad that you're here. Today, we're going to talk about understanding modern hybrid work and balancing security and employee experience. Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Denis O'Shea, product innovation and value creation expert, and I'll be your host. And today I have a very special guest. Hey, Denis.
Hey, Addy, how you doing?
I'm good. Denis O'Shea is the founder of Mobile Mentor. Now we can start. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're so invited to join the discussion and ask questions. So let's start. I know that you've been doing research on modern hybrid work. Could you tell us a bit about that?
I can, of course. I was really curious to understand what's actually happening in the workforce as we come out of this pandemic.
Right.
And it's amazing how much has changed in 2 short years. And if you think about the way people used to work before the pandemic, for about 20 years, the pattern was the same. We drove to work. We went into work, we logged onto a machine or a computer that was provided by our employer. We worked there, we logged off, we went home. Not much change in those 20 years compared to how much changed in the last 2 years. And so
Yeah.
I was really curious, and my company was really curious to understand, how are people actually working now? Because you got millions of people in their home offices with a
Right.
mixture of company devices and personal devices and all these applications and services. And we wanted to understand what's going on. And why are companies being hacked? And why is it so hard to retain your good employees when they feel like they can just go anywhere? And well, they
Yeah.
can't go anywhere. They stay in the home office, but they get a new laptop and they work for a
They,
new company.
yeah,
And
right.
we wanted to understand what's going on. What are the dynamics in this post-pandemic modern hybrid workforce? So we did a
Yeah.
big study to understand what's happening. And when we thought
Yeah.
we could predict some of the things, but we got some big shocks.
Wow. And it was maybe in the US?
It was in the US and in Australia. We decided to pick those two markets because they're geographically quite different. We knew there would be some overlap, some similarities, but some differences. And we intend to repeat the research every year for the next 4 years.
Wow. And
And so
what has changed? So tell me what was the most surprising thing for you?
I guess the most surprising thing for us was the attitude that people have towards security. The study focused on 4 industries that are regulated. So healthcare, education, government, and finance. And those industries are heavily regulated because the people who work in those industries have a duty, they have an obligation to protect something, either patient information or
Yeah.
student information or citizen information or client financial records.
Yeah.
And we found that people in those industries, in spite of the fact that they're heavily regulated, they put their personal privacy way ahead of company security. One of the
Yeah.
very simple questions we asked was,
Yeah.
what's more important to you, your personal privacy or your organization security? And it was about 80-20. 80% of
Wow.
people say my personal privacy is more important to me than anything else. Yeah, in
Yeah,
that realm.
but does it mean that they're securing their personal information better? Like today with social and everything, they share their information anywhere, right? So
Well, that's one of the crazy dichotomies or paradoxes in this that we have not reconciled, because we did the research by generation. So we looked at Gen Z, so the very young generation who just entered the workforce in the last couple of years, right? So they're
yeah,
between
yeah,
21 and 23 years old. And I'll
yeah,
come
yeah,
back to them because there's a lot to unpack around that
yeah,
generation. But we
yeah.
went right up to the baby boomer generation. And
Mhm.
when we studied people and we surveyed them around their attitudes to security and privacy, we found that young generation, Gen Z, they're quite different. They think differently to us, our generation, and other generations. And they don't really see or observe or notice security policies at work. So even
Yeah,
though a company might share their security policies with all employees, Gen Z kind of has a bag over their head and they don't see the policies. And even though
yeah,
they might receive the same security awareness training, they don't remember it, or they don't
yeah,
they don't recall they ever had that training. But
and
if you,
and it's not only for security, right? Or it's like we don't care about security. I think like privacy has no meaning for them. So or they always don't care what the organization is offering to them.
well, they care about the organization, but the thing is, they do see privacy policies. And here's the amazing paradox. So they're almost blind to security awareness training and policies, but they're hyper aware and hypersensitive to anything to do with privacy, which is really interesting. So
Yeah.
there's a big lesson in this for company leaders, in that if we want to communicate to that generation, it's best we stop talking about security, because people just glaze over it. They get fatigued when they hear security messaging. If we talk about privacy, we get their attention. So
I
if we
see.
say we're doing these initiatives and we're putting out this technology and we're doing all these things to protect your identity, Addy, and your
Mhm.
colleagues' identities, and our patients have entrusted us with their most sensitive information, and we need to protect the privacy of your information, your colleagues, your patients, et cetera, et cetera. Now people get it because it's framed in a way that's deeply personal to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think it's connected because they don't see a real gap? Then, like, this is our home and this is our work, and it's all merging together. For us, it's like it's the same environment. So, what is the difference?
Yeah, you're absolutely on the right track there. So because people are working at home, there is this really interesting mix happening between personal devices and work devices. So most people, if you look at their home office environment, they've probably got two or three or four devices going on, maybe a company laptop, a personal laptop, a tablet, a smartphone, or maybe two.
Yeah.
And then people don't really see a clear line between what's work and what's personal. And we found that people are doing a lot of their work on personal devices, and they're doing personal stuff on their work devices. There's all this sharing. And one of the most surprising data points we found in the study was that about, I think it was 26% of people admit that they allow other family members to use their work devices.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can just imagine that you're getting a good Mac and you want like your kid to play some kind of a game and it's not really working fast on your older machine. So I guess that that's a good reason.
Yeah. Actually, sorry, I got the number wrong. It's 46%, not 26%.
46.
46% of people allow other family members to use their work device.
Yeah, but like the question is, are people less compliant in general, or it's really related to the fact that they're mixing everything is the same work, going to the office, being at home, doing my personal stuff the same as doing my official role. So, do you think it's the compliance thing or the fact that they're single together?
It's a bit of both. So there is definitely a compliance piece to this. And what has happened is that over the last 2 years, because all this change has happened so quickly, employers have tried their best to enable people to be productive and work anywhere they live or where they need to be. And a lot of the measures that have been taken have been band-aids. They've been done quickly. And what we're seeing now is a little bit of pushback from the workforce. And we found that 46% of young people in particular find their company security policies to be too restrictive. They're too
Yeah.
restrictive. So what's happening is they're working around those policies. They're finding ways to kind of hack the system, and they're
Yeah.
working around their company's security. And a huge percentage of young people say that they're actually more efficient when they use tools like Dropbox and Gmail and these tools to collaborate, because they
Yeah.
find that the tools the company gave them were just too restrictive.
Yeah.
And so this is a major problem, because if you think about the leadership in those companies, they're paying for good tools and they're rolling them out with some security, and people are bypassing them. They're working
Yeah.
around them, and they're saving company data in a Dropbox account that nobody else has access to, and they're collaborating using tools that are just easier to use. And so that really starts to break down the security fabric that these organizations have put in place.
Yeah. I think that even if the user experience, for example, of the organizational tools. Let's say that inside the organization you're working with Teams, and outside they're using Slack or using Gmail, whatever. I don't think it's only the way that it's used. I think all the policies that are imposed on these tools make it so harder. Like it's not only a password. Sometimes you cannot get to some of the data. Some of the attachments are gone. You can't get types of files. You can't get some people from outside the organization to collaborate. All of that, I guess.
Yeah.
And if you
You-
like, it's too hard.
You're exactly right. And the easy example to give here is if a company needs their employees to use a VPN to access specific information, right? Let's say you got to fire up a VPN and log in again to access a folder, a shared drive somewhere to access some information. After a while, employees just get lazy and they start saving that somewhere easier, right?
Yeah,
Could be Dropbox or could be one of the many other storage locations. And that's the
yeah.
beginning of IP fragmentation. Your information is now getting fragmented and it's starting to leak and it's out there and public storage locations. That's one very
Mhm.
simple example, but it's happening all around us all day, every day.
And that's the reason why companies are getting hacked. So the hackers are working easier with less work to get what they need.
Yes, the primary reason that organizations are getting hacked is through their passwords. So compromised credentials, so the combination of username and password, when they get compromised, that's the primary way that bad actors get into companies. And the problem that we found from our research is that most of us have too many passwords, right? We've just got too many passwords in our
Yeah.
work lives and in our personal lives. And it varies by age. And the really scary thing is the youngest generation has the most passwords.
The
So
most.
they've been in the workforce less time than all the rest of us, but they've got more accounts and more subscriptions and more passwords than any other generation. And they're not able to manage them. They're just not able to manage them very effectively because there's too many. And so what happens is, as humans, we cannot remember a database of all these complex long passwords with numbers and alphanumeric characters, and we can change them every 90 days. So we find hacks, we find ways of kind of cheating. And what we
Yeah.
found is the way people save and store their passwords is a major problem. So we call that password hygiene, and what people are doing to doing with their passwords is really the problem. So we found 29% of people write their work passwords in a personal journal or a personal diary.
They need to
So
write it somewhere.
they need to write it somewhere. And another 24% put their work passwords on a notes app in their phone. And most of
Oh,
their phones are BYO. They're bring your own personal
yeah.
devices.
Yeah, they're not
And then,
secure.
yeah, and then more people save theirs in a Word document or a spreadsheet. And people just are not using secure password management tools to manage their passwords. So if you
Yeah.
think about the workforce coming in, using more and more passwords, saving them and storing them poorly, and sometimes they get out of control. And then also as humans, we tend to do a couple of things. We tend to use familiar words as the basis of our password. Like we know from other research that 15% of people use their pet's name or
Makes sense?
a variation of the pet's name. Maybe could be
Yeah.
the pet's name with a season or a month or a number or a birth date or something like that. And and then we also cluster our passwords. So people might have the same password for all their social accounts or all their bank accounts or all their work applications. And so if one gets hacked, then all the others are vulnerable.
Yeah. Which is not good. And what you mentioned that employees are resigning. So with the great resignation, how do you see that in your research? Why people are leaving?
There's a few reasons. We see that what happened in 2020 was there were two parts of this. In 2020, when we thought we were all coming out of the pandemic, we had that kind of false start. Employers started hiring a lot of new people remotely, and we saw companies hiring people whom they had never met to work for them remotely, and that was a big shift. And in the battle to get talent, we saw some power shift from employers to employees. The employees kind of got a lot more power than they ever had before. And then in 2021, we saw almost the opposite happen. Existing employees were saying, hey, I might have better options working somewhere else. I can just stay at home in my pajamas all day and I can, I can work the way I want to work. And we saw
Right.
people leave their organizations. And we didn't quite understand all the reasons why, but we got some more understanding through the research we did. And what we found is, in particular, younger generations feel like other companies are doing a better job with technology enablement. And that's a key thing. So they don't know for a fact, but they perceive that other companies are doing a better job than their own company. The grass is greener on the other
Yeah.
side. And people
Yeah.
are leaving thinking they're going to get more flexibility, better tech, better tools, a better way of working somewhere else.
Yeah.
And we've got this great unsettling shakedown
Yeah.
happening in industry right now. And the generation that's most at most unrest is that young generation, Gen Z.
Hmm.
So there's something very interesting going on here. Their behaviors and their attitudes to security are not great. We know that. And they've got
Hmm.
passwords all over the place.
Yeah.
But if you're a company leader, your immediate instinct is probably, hey, we need to tighten up. We need to clamp down. We need to lock down. We need to bring these kids in line. But guess what they're
Yeah.
going to do? They're going to
Leave.
walk. Yeah, they're
Yeah.
going to leave because they
Yeah.
perceive somebody else is doing a better job.
Yeah. They will handle them differently. They will trust them more. They will not tell them what to do, and they could be more free in their time, in their resources, and what they get. They feel like it will be better there. That's what
Yeah,
they think.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but when we think about it, because they're so young, they don't have lots of relationship with work and with this specific company compared to maybe someone who's worked like a few years, maybe more in this like workplace, and they feel obligated and connected to the people, to the organization, to whatever. And when you're just starting, you don't really care. Like you don't have, you're not the CEO apparently, so you can do whatever you want, right? So it's like I guess, and I think it's related to the fact that people understand that they should be trusted. That's what I think. They know that in these 2 years they've worked hard, and they like the bottom line did not change to most of the companies. And now they're saying, why don't you trust us? We've shown you that you could trust us. So why not? And they don't see them, they don't see what the C-level are seeing or what the goals of the company as they see it. And then they say, okay, we're leaving. It's not for us.
yeah. And there's an interesting dynamic at play here as well, because a lot of people joined their companies remotely in the last 2 years. And that young generation, Gen Z, they never knew an office based work culture before the pandemic because they were still
Yeah.
in university
Yeah,
or
right.
wherever they were. But they never knew the culture of going to work, being with colleagues, going out to lunch together, maybe going for drinks on a Friday, and all the informal relationships that happen, all the loose links that help you understand the context of the business or the organization you're part of. And that
Yeah.
sense of belonging is super important, especially for young people to feel like I've got my place in this organization. I belong. I've got all these people who know me. I'm respected. I've got a career path. That's missing now in some organizations because people just talk over video and they
Yeah.
don't get a chance to meet and they don't understand. They don't have the same contextual relevance and contextual understanding of where are we going as an organization? Where do I fit? Do I have a future? What will it look like for me in a couple of years' time? Who are my
Yeah.
role models? That's all much harder in a remote setting. And in particular, if you're Gen Z and you're 22 years old and this is your first job and you're only working remotely or you've been onboarded remotely, it's and you can only assess your employer through the lens of a remote employee because you never knew life at work before
Yeah.
the pandemic.
Yeah.
That's not an easy place to be.
Yeah. I totally agree with the belonging part. I think that you want to belong to something and you feel that you have this kind of relationship. I care about this place and they care about me. And when you're doing everything by screen, it's like, yeah, I do my role, I do what I'm supposed to do, but all the additional values you could get from a group of people working together is missing. And then you're staying alone, more or less, just doing whatever you want. And that's
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. And it's particularly challenging for remote workers and the young Gen Z workers. But there's actually a big positive in this. We
Hmm.
think that organizations can learn a lot by observing their remote workers and by observing the Gen Z, the young workers. And we think organizations that want to develop a long-term healthy culture would be able to do so by really observing and studying what's happening with Gen Z. And we think the best
Hmm.
predictor of the future is to understand that generation now, because you're
Yeah.
going to get the next wave of Gen Z coming into the organization. Here in the United States, it'll be in May when they graduate college, and in Australia
Ooh.
and New Zealand, it'll be in November, December. And every year, a new wave of them enters the workforce, and they will bring their attitudes and behaviors and perceptions and preferences. And in 5 years' time, they'll be in managerial. They'll be in their first management roles, and some will be moving into leadership roles. So the more we understand them and the more we can harness their energies and their way of seeing the world, the better for organizations. But by understanding them, we can predict with a high degree of accuracy, we think, what the world will look like in 5 years' time when this generation starts to exert their control and their influence and they start to flood the workplace. We're going to get older, and
Apparently.
apparently my father keeps saying to me, Dennis, whatever you do, don't get old. It's not much fun.
Don't do it.
But it's
My
coming, right?
my father told me nobody got out of this life alive.
There you
So
go. And so while we get older, that young generation is going to flood the workforce and they will
Mhm.
dominate eventually. So,
So what do they need to know about them? So what is like lacking from the leadership? What is the knowledge they need to know in order to be prepared for that flood, as you say?
I think it's recognition that that generation thinks differently. And here's a good way of thinking about it. So demographically, that generation is between 20 and 23 years old, something like that. But psychographically, they're the only generation alive who cannot remember 9/11. Now, everybody in this planet, I bet you and I and everybody listening knows exactly where you were, who you were with, and what you were doing when 9/11 happened.
Yeah,
Okay?
right.
It profoundly impacted our minds and our lives, no matter where we were. I was living in Switzerland, a neutral country, but it was huge the way it weighed on the country, everywhere in the
Yeah.
world, except Gen Z. They were running
Hmm.
around in nappies, completely oblivious to what was going on. And
Yeah.
then they grew up over the next 20 years and they did their study and they entered the workforce during a pandemic. So they're wired differently, and they have not learned to fear for their security in the way we did. Their lives were
Hmm.
not threatened in the way our lives, were impacted. And so they come into work not concerned about things that we've always been concerned or that we've been concerned about for 20 years.
Yeah.
And yet they're the generation we see who say privacy is important, but still they share everything about their lives in
Everything.
social media, everything.
Yeah.
And so we're still trying to figure out what's going on here. How do they, on one hand, say, I'm blind to security, I care about privacy, but here's all the information about the holiday I've just been on and who I'm with and where I stayed and how long I was away from home. And here's my pet and my pet's name. So now you can guess my passwords. You know,
Yeah. Of course.
there's a lot to unpack with that generation, and we haven't
Yeah.
unpacked it all yet. We have not.
Yeah.
But my
Like
encouragement,
you mentioned the 9/11, and I'm from Israel. We have so many events to think about. It's like you have one big one, I have lots of them. But
yes,
I think that it's not related only to personal security. It's related to the way you think about your work and about your job. My parents, they always thought about like job security. Going to a place, working for 15 years, 20 years in the same like place, and you're secure because you don't need to fight for to make a living. And today, many of these young kids, they get what they want. It's much easier to live financially than it was in the past, especially like in the US and in Australia, for example, not in Africa, but
Yeah.
it's like it's
Yeah.
easy for them. So they're not that worried. And maybe it's good that they're not worrying. They're not thinking like 15 years from now, I need to have a pension, whatever, right?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's a good thing.
It is, and you're right. Our generation was brought up to think, get a steady, stable job with some big government organization, and you'll never lose your job. The young generation now, I think, realizes that actually getting some versatile skills makes me a lot more secure and gives me more
Yeah,
freedom and adaptability than sitting in
right.
one job for a long time.
Yeah, you're right. So what do you think it's so hard to retain talent in general and these people in particular to just make them stay? If we understand it, let's say the organization understand that this is who they are. Why it's so hard to retain them, to make them like stay for 4 years? I know 4 years maybe it's too much, like 3, 4 years in the same place.
I think there's a couple of things playing out. It's the fact that change is so easy now for an employee. In the past, pre-pandemic, if you were looking to change a job, you had to work out your new commute, where you were going to go, and was it going to be more travel or less travel, and all that. That's just not a consideration anymore, at least not for people in technology. You literally
Yeah,
say at the same desk using a different laptop, and that's
yeah,
it. That's your job change. So the
yeah,
barrier to change is much lower than it used to be.
right.
And then that sense of belonging, I feel, has changed as well. People tend to, what I'm observing is people tend to have good relationships with a small number of people in their company that they talk to all the time. They're on Zoom calls or Teams calls with them, but they're missing the big picture relationships. And if any of those, that small number of strong relationships, if any of that breaks down, something goes bad with between a boss and an employee, or the key person leaves, that individual now will feel quite unstable because they've lost a significant part of their work relationship. In
Yeah,
the past, if you were coming to work every day and talking to 20 different people or interacting with 20 different people, you might not miss that one person so much. So
right.
I think our relationships are more brittle with between the employee and the employer, just more brittle and more fragile,
Hmm.
and it's just easier to change. And because there's a shortage in the marketplace, there's always a better offer out there. And so it's the battle we're seeing is actually intensifying. It's getting tougher.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. So we said that the line between work and personal life is blurred. So how do you think it's going to influence companies and leadership? What do you need to prepare in order to understand that the past rules are not relevant anymore? Now you need to understand people see work differently, people perceive their role, what they're doing differently. What do they need to understand from it?
I think there's a big piece missing in a lot of organizations around the cultural alignment. And what I'm starting to understand is that people are really looking for a sense of purpose above and beyond the job they do. And people will join organizations where they feel like their values are aligned with the organization, or the cultural environment that they want to work in. When they feel like they have that alignment on culture, it's a soft thing, but it's becoming extremely important in society today. Wasn't important in the past, but I feel like there are soft factors at play that employers have not yet tapped into, and companies and government organizations or schools or hospitals expressing with great clarity who they want to be, how we want to show up at work, how we want to present ourselves, how we want to serve our community, and finding people who identify with that as their mission. That's going to become a really important factor going forward, more so than the hardware I'm going to give you to do your job, or the pay I'm
Yeah,
going to give you, or the benefits, or the flexibility, or whatever. I think it's that kind of purpose driven, mission driven organization where people hear a leader speaking, or they read something from the company, or they can identify with some charity work that the organization is doing, and they feel this thing, and it's deep and it's carnal, and they go, I want to work for you guys. I want to be part of your team. I get
Yeah.
it. I feel what you're doing and I want to be part of that. And if you can get to people emotionally like that, I believe that's a lot stronger than saying we're going to give you a shiny new laptop and all these
Yeah.
flexible hours.
Yeah, I totally agree that, especially the young generation, that, sometimes people see them as a bit like it's a trouble to handle them because they require so much, and they want to understand everything really fast, and to be in a leadership position in about months from their starting date, more or less. So I see that people sometimes it's hard for them to understand it, but I really appreciate the fact that they do ask questions. They don't agree with what they're like getting from from day one. They have a question mark. They're not compliant, and I really like it. And what you're saying is they want to know that what they're doing is like a good thing. You see it like you see it a lot in like in social media companies. People are asking questions in technology companies. People are asking questions. You see it in hardware companies. Where do people? Where are the manufacturers? Capabilities, what are they doing exactly, where, what are the level of payment that they get, like they ask questions. And I think that the previous, maybe like 20 years ago, 15 years ago even, people did not think about it. They didn't really care. They say like that's a successful company, they make lots of money, it's a good place to work for, right?
Yeah.
And now it's like
Yeah.
it's different, and I really appreciate that when I
Yeah.
see that.
I reflect back to the conversation that was happening in the workplace 10, 15 years ago. And there was a lot of company leaders were complaining about the millennials. I don't know if you
Yeah.
can remember. There was a lot
Yeah.
of bitching and moaning about these millennials and their expectations and what they brought to work and what they were demanding and expecting. But we learned to harness millennials, and many organizations now are led by these amazing young people. Even we're seeing some countries. Look at the Baltic nations. Look at Finland and Sweden and Estonia and these young female leaders in those countries.
Yeah.
And society has learned to embrace millennials, and millennials have learned to embrace society, and they're doing
Yeah.
amazing, truly amazing
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
I feel like we have not yet figured out Gen Z, and Gen Z hasn't figured us out.
Yeah, it seems.
They really haven't. But one thing we do know about them is they're fiscally, financially, they're very prudent. They seem to be following the behaviors of the baby boomer generation rather than the generations in between. They, I
Really?
think, they seem to have observed the excesses of the millennial generation, this crazy spending and overconsumption. And some of the behaviors we're seeing from Gen Z now are save, save, save. They're fiscally quite responsible, which is a bit surprising.
That is
Um,
surprising.
yeah, yeah. And I think
Yeah.
over time, as we learn to embrace Gen Z and they learn to work with us and with our organizations, I'm hopeful that great things will happen in the same way
Yeah.
that great things are happening now at the millennial generation.
Yeah. I think that when something new is entering your like mind, you're saying like I'm suspicious. I don't know. It seems weird to me that this is how they think. But once you understand why they think so, and why do they operate this way, it's it's easier for you just to connect with them. Once you connect with them, you could really utilize their talents and skills and what they're looking for, their goals and aims in life.
Yeah.
But now we're just, we're just looking at it. And it's a bit suspicious. I have four
Mm.
kids, and the oldest one is 18, and it's like sometimes I feel like we're not in the same like world. How
Yeah.
they see the world is so different, and then I feel so old if we're talking about getting old. But I don't really always understand the way that they're thinking. Like, what is important for them? Why do
Yeah.
they think so?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's my daughter, so I can
There
just
you go.
guess if it's someone online,
Yeah.
which is really really hard. So
Yeah.
what do you think that leaders really need to know, and what will make a successful leader for a remote hybrid team?
I think there's a couple of things. One is to involve remote workers when you're making decisions on technology, because remote workers will pressure test your decisions faster than anybody else. So you might think you can choose the next set of tools or technology for collaborating and how you work, but those remote workers will prove you wrong or prove you right, because they
Yeah.
will be the ones that will find the flaws and find the weaknesses. So my first piece of advice would be kind of bring some of those remote workers into the tent and involve them in the decision making process.
Mhm.
And the second I would say is to involve Gen Z in how you communicate, because we know now they're blind to any form of communication around security, but really, really aware of anything around privacy. So if you're drafting or crafting communications on changes that are coming or rolling out new technology or new tools or new ways of doing things, use Gen Z to help you get the message right, because they will be the most critical of how it lands. And if you can use them to help you shape that message and make sure that it lands well, you're going to be much more effective in cutting through to people.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like I come from design, and there is always this like balance between what the company or the software requires from you and the users on the other hand, especially if we're talking about security, they don't have the same goals, right? So when you're thinking about the organization as the main platform and the users as the employees, it's just the same. You could require VPN and passwords and so many like barriers, but in the end, if they feel it's like too much for them, they will not do it. They will just find a way. And
They,
if you make them work too hard, it's not good for you too. So you have to balance that.
exactly. And organizations need to really accelerate through this change, accelerate through change. Like we have to get away from passwords. We just have to. That's a good example. I'm glad you raised that. And if you think about it, passwords were a great invention in 1961.
61.
1961. But we found out in 1921 they were the primary reason why organizations are getting hacked and getting ransomed. And as a
Yeah.
society, we just have to move away from passwords really quickly now and go fully passwordless. So that's what, one of the things company leaders need to do. Same with VPNs. For a long time, we thought VPNs could be trusted. We thought they were safe. We thought the entity at the other end of our VPN was allowed to access our resources. Well, we found out again in 2021, that's how the Colonial Pipeline breach happened, and many other
Mhm.
breaches. So we need to get away from VPNs. We need to get away from passwords. We need to modernize the way we enable people to work remotely. There are better ways now, much more secure, much more efficient ways of enabling people to work, and companies have to embrace them and get away from this legacy thinking and legacy technology, because that's
Yeah.
holding us back.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the legacy is not only in technology, it's the legacy of your mind and the way that you perceive the workplace and your life and your employees' connection to work and to their lives. So, and like I work in technology in Israel for more than 20 years, and security is very, very big in Israel. We have lots of
Yeah,
security companies.
yeah, and you're
So
very good
I've
at
done,
it.
yeah, we are good at it. And I've done so many security products out there. And I see them getting more soft, getting more it's more complex, but for the user it should be much easier. And it seems that what has been like 10 years ago, even not 20 years, 10 years ago in security is not that relevant right now. And we see hackers being so more sophisticated,
Oh
more
yeah,
and more sophisticated. They're so smart. You cannot not like appreciate it. The way that they're understanding these things, they're so smart. So
yeah.
you cannot just take a name and a number and that's it, and then a question mark in most of the cases. Like that's the character, right?
You're right. And for company leaders, it's all about getting the balance right between security and employee experience. And it's a constant, never ending balancing act. And you'll never reach a destination. It will never be over, because you'll always be rolling out new tools and new policies and new ways of doing things. And so every decision we make, we have to balance the security and the employee experience. Those two go hand in hand. And that's why
Yeah,
this is a journey to get to a
yeah,
modern configuration. It's a journey, and there's no finite start date or end date. It will go
yeah.
on for many, many years.
Yeah. It makes me think about a YouTuber. My son told me what he's 16, and there is this YouTuber, and he finds hackers, people like scammers, actually, people trying to scam people and get their password, their name, and then go to their environments, whatever, and steal their identity and so on. And you see his work, and he's really smart. It's called like Take It Realm or something like that. And I really love to see what he's doing. And it's so sophisticated. Like he talks to them, and then he gets to their details, and then he tries the password, and then he hacks their systems, and then he gets back to them. And wow, it's like you have to see it. Really, it's the best YouTuber
I'd
ever.
like to see that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd like to see that. Can you send me the link?
Yeah, I'll send you. It's the Tech It
Thank
Reality.
you.
Yeah. Okay, so we're almost done. So what is your number one tip for leaders today?
Wow. Number one tip for leaders today is to observe what is happening in your modern hybrid workforce. Observe. So not seek to change yet, but watch what's happening with remote workers and the way they're really working. Not how you expect them to be working, but what are they really doing? And listen to Gen Z. Because if we believe the future is going to be mainly hybrid work, and some people are going to work remotely and some not, and there's going to be a lot of young people coming into your organization in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to be best equipped if you really understand those two cohorts, the remote community and the young community. So listen and observe would be my best advice.
Yeah. In general, listening is like underrated in general. People think that saying what you think and leading people and giving them the direction is more important. But I think that listening is like the basic of what you're doing in general. So it's a really good advice as I see it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And where could people hear more about you and your work and contact you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Denis O'Shea. That's DENIS O''SAGA. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. And then my company is called Mobile Mentor. It's mobile-mentor.com. And we specialize in helping organizations to be secure and have a great employee experience, specifically when they've got a hybrid workforce and they need to get that balance right. So we've been in this space for about 17 or 18 years, and we're very passionate about working with organizations who want to do good things and get that balance right.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, Dennis. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I really love your accent, which is so special. So I guess the ones who listen to the podcast will enjoy it as much as me.
Thank you. I practice it every day.
Yeah, you do it really well. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining me. If you want to learn more about what I do, go to invincibleinnovation.com, and I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya. I'm Mazor, Kario, and you've been listening to the Invincible Innovation Podcast. Make sure to visit our website, invincibleinnovation.com, where you can learn more about our programs and my book, Innovating Through Chaos. I'll be waiting for you next week in our next episode. Thank you for listening.